Okay. We recording? All right. So, well, thank you, David, for having me here. My name is Nicole Stoner. As David said before, I'm the extension educator in Gage County. So I do what David does, but way over here on the southeast corner of the state and cover 11 counties there in that southeast corner. Um, and I have a background in both horticulture and entomology. I did a bachelor's in both. And so David asked me to talk about insects in winter. So we'll kind of go over that here a little bit. So we got to remember when we're talking about insects, the many roles that they have. And honestly, this is why I fell in love with bugs in the first place, because they do so many things and they're so teeny tiny. So they're, obviously we like them because they're pollinators. They're good recyclers. They help build our soils and are in part of that food chain. And they're going to convert with our plant communities, helping convert that plant biomass into animal biomass. And then some of them are predators, obviously. So when we look at these, and I'm going to make this just a little bit interactive from time to time, anybody know what this insect up here in the top corner is?
We have dung beetle.
Correct. I love a dung beetle. Man, they're so cool. And they'll pick up the dung or the poo and they roll it into these balls and they're just happy to have it around. They are a cool insect. And as I always tell people, especially children, if we didn't have bugs, we'd be knee deep in poo. Nobody wants that. So we got to have dung beetles to help with that. So they're great recyclers. All right. And how about this bottom picture? Anybody know what that is?
Yes, we have ladybug larva.
Correct. Yeah, I always call them alligators because they kind of look like alligators, you know? But a lot of people miss that because they look so different from a ladybug, right? But remember, ladybugs have complete metamorphosis. So they go from egg to larvae, then they pupate and turn into something completely different, which is the ladybug beetle. It's similar to, or it's the same life cycle that butterflies have. So that's why they look so much different. So this is a good predator. So if you don't know much about insects and you see this on your plant, you're going to worry that it's a bad guy. It kind of looks a little aggressive, right? Look at all those little spikes. But if you know what they are, you'll realize that this is a ladybug and they're a good insect to have, because even in this larval stage, they're eating lots of little insects, like aphids and stuff like that. So, but our insects, they have lots of great roles. And too many. There we go. One of the good ways we use them is through predators, of course, that they feed on the little guys. And this includes the one that we've probably been seeing a lot of. I think on the Grow Big Red, we were talking about this a little bit, and somebody, I think it was, is it Elaine from your area, David? That I
Elaine's from Scottsbluff.
Okay, so it was her. And she was asking me about those little black bugs that are bugging us right now and biting us. And that's the minute pirate bug. And they should be going away now. We did have a frost here last night, like a pretty good frost. We got down to, I think, 30. Definitely a nice blanket of frost here. So that's going to kill those off. But this insect that feeds on us in the fall is actually a predator out in the fields and in our gardens during the spring and summer. And when we clean up our gardens and they harvest the fields, they have no food left. So they come and feel around on us with their mouth part and bite us. And so, we're not food for them, but they're looking to see. So that's one of our predators. Of course, a lot of the bugs. I like the assassin bug and the wheel bug. The wheel bug's that one with that giant wheel on its back. They're very cool. Green lacewings and brown lacewings, pretty much the same thing, but one's green and one's brown. Of course, who can forget the praying mantis? And then we've got a lot of like lady beetles, ground beetles, and then some flies and things like that that are predators. And then, of course, our favorite thing with insects is the pollinators. We got to have pollinators because that's what makes fruits and that's what makes more flowers and more plants. And so, of course, honeybees are our superstar, which are shown right here. This is a honeybee. They are very, very fuzzy, and they kind of have like electrostatic for that pollen. And then they have what are called pollen baskets on their legs. So it's basically like a built-in bag for them to put more pollen in. And so they'll just shove a whole bunch of pollen in there. So they're a really good pollinator for us. But honeybees aren't native to the United States. They're actually from the main one that we have is the European honeybee. And so they're not here like originally. And so if we're looking at some of our native pollinators, that's where like your solitary bees come in. So we've got like leafcutter bees, the mason bees. There's one called a carder bee, and those ones work on lamb's ear, and they kind of flick at the or scrape at the fuzz on lamb's ear, and they make like a little fuzzy ball out of that. So that's the carder bee. They're pretty cool. Of course, bumblebees. They live in the ground, but they're solitary as well. Of course, who could forget the butterflies? And with the butterflies are the moths. And then we've got a lot of beetles that are great pollinators. We've got flies that are good pollinators. There's some wasps that are good pollinators that we kind of overlook. We think about honeybees and we think about butterflies, but there's a lot of other pollinators that do a lot of this great work for us. So in the winter, what do they do? Do they just sit there with their mittens on, shivering? No, they don't have mittens. That'd be a really tiny piece of sewing or knitting to do. So how do they deal with them? So insects in general are what are called ectothermic or cold-blooded. Basically, they rely on external sources to regulate their body temperature. I would say I lean towards ectothermic, or what they called it in college. There's another term called poikilothermic, which is where you're getting your temperature from the environment. That's what I always say I am, because when it's hot, I'm hot, and when it's cold, I'm cold. Now I can technically regulate my own temperature, and insects can't, but pretty close. I think I've grown up enough with them that I think we're one and the same. But no, they're relying on external sources to regulate that body temperature. So they can't, if it's too cold, they can't do anything to warm up, really, not a lot. So they're going to rely on sunlight or warm areas and things like that to warm back up. So if they're exposed to temperatures below that freezing point of their body fluids, then they could die from that, obviously. And it's not as much from the cold temperature, but when insects are outside and it becomes too cold, ice crystals will form in their body. So insects, so you know how we have our whole circulatory system where our blood moves through the vessels, right? Insects aren't quite like that. It's just kind of in there. And so ice crystals will form in that, and then that can cause cells to burst, cause organ damage, gut damage, things like that. So the lower lethal temperature for each insect is different. And so really, for the most part, they're going to need about 40 to 50 degrees to survive winter. So when I was working on this presentation, I was looking and they're all so very different that there's not really a generalization. So I'm just going to go over like kind of the different ways they can overwinter. And so that would be things like migration, which we'll talk about here, freeze avoidance, which is like hibernation. They're going to avoid that ice development in the body, and freeze tolerance, so they can tolerate the formation of ice in their body. So we'll go into more detail with that. So like I said, each insect is going to differ in how they overwinter. And it's not based on family, and it's not based on order or anything like that. So like you look at it, and if you say lepidopterans, which are butterflies and moths, bagworms overwinter as eggs. None of them look like they overwinter as larvae underground, but we've got some that are pupal, or overwinter as pupa, and that's like your Cecropia moth. And then some are overwinter as adults, so like some of your mourning cloak butterfly, and then some migrate, as we know. And so it just kind of depends on the species on how they overwinter, what their life cycle is like. So the winter avoidance are what we're going to call the snowbirds. So these are just like snowbirds of people. They don't like the cold, so they're just going to move south for the winter. And so obviously our biggest example for that is the monarch butterfly. But there's some others that do that as well. Black cutworms do, the spotted cucumber beetle, the corn earworm, or the tomato fruit worm will. Our fall armyworms. So we had a outbreak of fall armyworms this year. David, did you get a lot of those out there?
They're out there.
They were out there? Okay. So it's not one that typically lives this far north, even like any time of the year. But every once in a while, in certain weather conditions, they can move this far north. But when they do, they're not going to overwinter here. They die once that extreme cold comes on or once the cold comes because they can't survive our winters. And so when those move up north, it's on certain wind speed or wind movement that moves them further north or other, like a lot of time in 21 when we had them, I think was the first time I saw them. They were moved here because a hurricane was moving through the Gulf of Mexico area. And so it moved it, those wind patterns shifted them further north. But typically, this is one that's not going to live here because it can't survive our winter conditions. So obviously, our monarchs are our best migrator. And so they are the only butterfly known to make that two-way migration, just like birds do. And so most of your other ones, like I said, they're going to overwinter as larvae, pupa, or even adults, but monarchs can't survive our cold northern climates. And so they take environmental cues to know when to move north or south. And so when they're moving south for the winter, they look at, or they're noticing, shorter day length. It is getting, it does get cooler, especially cooler nights when it gets early into the fall, right? And so those kinds of things are going to be those environmental cues, and it's going to tell them they have to move. We aren't as good about figuring out when fall and winter is coming, other than based on the calendar, right? But wildlife, insects, plants, they know when winter's coming, and they can use those cues when they need to move into their, wherever they're doing for the winter. So these butterflies are the monarchs, just like those, I said, those fall armyworms move on air currents. The monarchs do as well. And they also use a thermal to move long distance. And so what that is basically it's like the cold wind moves up and it's like an updraft. And then they float up, like spiral up on the updraft and then with the wind, and then they can move further that way by using the wind and the thermals. So they can travel pretty far. It's about 3,000 miles across from northern North America, or some go into Canada, all the way back to the Sierra Madre Mountains in Mexico. So it's a bit of a traveling for them, and they're teeny tiny, as you know, in comparison, you know. And so there are some monarchs in Western North America that are going to overwinter in California, and they're able to survive California winters. So this is their travel patterns. As you can see, they're coming from the northern United States, even up into Canada, and they're moving back down into Mexico here to those Sierra Madre Mountains. But these ones over here on the western side of the United States just kind of shift over to a little bit warmer in California, and they can survive over here. I think it said in the redwood trees. And so when they migrate, it's pretty cool because they're only going to travel during the day, and they have to find a roost site. And it's when I was reading through all this stuff, they actually use a lot of the same roost sites year after year. So I don't know how that works. They must tell their grandkids, but they are very important for that migration to have those good roost sites. And when it starts to cool down, they're going to gather a lot closer on that tree and find a nice tree to where it's warm for them. They'll roost in like pines, firs, and cedars because it's more closed up, and they're able to stay warmer that way. And then early in the morning, they'll come out and they'll bask in the sunrise before they start flying around again. So if you ever get to see one of these, it's pretty cool. I saw it with painted ladies a few years ago, and it is awesome. Just so many butterflies on the tree. So it's pretty cool if you can see that with the monarchs. And then when it starts to get spring and summertime, they're going to move back to the north again. When they move back up, it takes 3 to 4 generations to reach the northern US and Canada. So that's why we see like one of their generations goes through Nebraska. So when we see them, we'll see the eggs laid on the plants, and then those develop into those beautiful caterpillars, and then they form that very pretty chrysalis, and then they move. They you can see the butterflies flying around. Um, so they start that migration when those temperatures increase and your days lengthen. Again, they're using those environmental cues to tell them when spring and summer is coming so that they know they can start to move. Um, so with that first one, they're becoming reproductive, they breed and they lay eggs. And then that's what moves on to start flying through the United States. Okay. Questions on that so far? Let's see. Something in the chat. Oh, nope. Okay. Oh, okay. So Anne saw several dead monarchs in her garden a few weeks ago following a very windy day. Did the high winds cause them to die? I mean, it could have been the little bit cooler. What you're saying a few weeks ago, it was still pretty warm then. I mean, it kind of depends. It could have just been that that was the end of that life cycle and they were moving on to the next. Kind of depends on when that happened. But yeah, that's no fun. Okay, so freeze avoidance. This is where they can kind of avoid the freezing within them. And one of the ways they can do that is through diapause, which is kind of like dormancy. But it's basically a period of suspended development in their develop or in an insect during unfavorable environmental conditions. So eggs, they'll just kind of go into a diapause over the winter, and then development will resume in the spring. So it just kind of stops, and then they can resume it in the spring. And so that's one way they can avoid the freeze. They can also produce a substance similar to antifreeze, and it's a type of an alcohol that's produced in the insect, and it works a lot like an antifreeze to keep them from freezing. Some are going to use these cryoprotectants to slow that ice formation, which is it's kind of what that antifreeze is, and it just kind of slows that ice formation within their body, and allows them to survive that. So, funny story about this. So when I first was in entomology, my 116, 115 class in lab, we had to collect insects. And at the time, I was living in an apartment in Lincoln with my sister. And it was like my first entomology class. And we were learning about how insects can survive some level of freezing. And so an insect can actually be put into a freezer if it's for a very short period of time. And when you pull them back out, they're not dead and they're still alive to move. So I was collecting insects for my class, and I put all these insects in these baggies and I put them in our freezer just to like store them, because when you're doing a collection, it's a good place to store them because they stay fresh and until you can get around to pinning them. But I put a post-it on the freezer for my sister because she was at work, and I said, "There's insects in the freezer. Don't worry about them, but don't bring them back out. They're not dead." And she's not an entomology fan. So it really freaked her out when I was like, yeah, I have insects in the freezer and they're not dead. But they weren't completely. So just my funny story about that, because if it's a short period of time and if it's one of these types, they can actually survive that. Now, obviously, if you leave them in the freezer for a longer period of time, it will kill them, because they're exposed, and they're not in their typical conditions for how they survive, and they're not prepared for it. So a lot of our insects are going to hide in soil, trees, leaf litter, and all of that so that they can survive winter conditions. So we'll get into this a little bit more at the end on how to help them through the winter. So But it's just fascinating to me that they can produce this antifreeze-like substance so that they don't form those ice crystals. Oop, hold on. Try again. Here we go. So a couple of examples here up in this corner. This is the spruce budworm. And they produce antifreeze proteins that allow it to survive temperatures well below negative 22 degrees Fahrenheit. Isn't that fascinating? I mean, the temperature range for these things. And I had to put in, these are bark beetles. They're like my favorite insect because I did insect traps for the USDA when I was in college, and bark beetles was the main one that I was trapping for to see which species we had. And bark beetles, they use glycerol as a cryoprotectant to survive down to negative 40 degrees. So they keep their inside tissues from freezing with that cryoprotectant. So just pretty cool how they can do that. And these are Scelitus, which are my favorite bark beetle. Then we have freeze tolerance. So those are the insects that can handle the formation of internal ice. So they can deal with ice inside of them. And so this woolly bear caterpillar, we've all been seeing those wandering around, haven't we? They actually start their hibernation process before winter because they're like, I'm going to start getting ready for that. So they initiate it at warmer temperatures, and they can freeze to a state of suspended animation and then thaw out and move around again. So pretty fascinating. And some of our insects can kind of just get rid of a lot of their food and water, and so the ice can't form in their body. So they do fascinating things. So this guy, we don't have this darkling beetle. We have some darkling beetles, but not the Alaska darkling beetle. And it can survive being frozen solid and then reanimate when thawed. So it can freeze and then thaw. So it can freeze to temperatures as low as negative 19 degrees and still survive. So that's why it's the Alaska darkling beetle. It survives up in Alaska. And the ice formation is slowed way down to protect its cells, and they do that through that antifreeze. So pretty cool thing. So then I wanted to talk about bees because they're one of our favorite pollinators, of course, all of the different bees. So females of some species are going to die after they lay their eggs, and then that species overwinters as eggs, right? So we think about how they, lay their eggs and then the adult dies. Some of them are going to spend the winter in a pupa or a larvae, or like in cocoons. So that metabolism is going to slow down. Leafcutter bees and mason bees are going to be overwintering as pupae. And then some species overwinter as adults, and that would be like your mason bee. And they just kind of remain dormant until your temperatures warm back up. But they can be in soil, in pre-existing tunnels, in wood, hollow stems, or leaf litter, or in man-made bee hotels. So you think about the leafcutter bee. So what they do is through the summer months, they're cutting those little circles out of the edge of the leaf of your usually roses. And what they're doing is they lay an egg in a tube like what's shown in this picture, and then they pack it with that leaf, and then they go and find another piece of leaf and then lay another egg in that tunnel and then pack it with that leaf, and they keep doing that until they filled that tunnel. And then those eggs, they emerge sometime, probably late summer. And then that leaf is there as food for them. And so then they're overwintering as that pupae in there. And so then once spring and summer hits, that's when they come out of those tunnels and emerge as adults. So that's, we got to make sure that we leave those things around to help them out. Some of them are going to be down in the soil when they are overwintering because that protects them. Honeybees also fascinate me a little bit. So they actually survive winter not completely dormant. So if you ever noticed, if you're out on a warm day in the winter, you might see a bee. Especially late winter, you might see a bee scavenging about. So it's got to be above, I think it's 50 or 55 degrees, and the wind speed's got to be 10 miles an hour or so. before bees can fly. Don't quote me on those numbers, but it's right in that range. And so if it gets that warm, sometimes, late fall or early spring, those times of the winter, you'll see bees scavenging about. And so they can kind of change how their behavior is and things like that. Um, and that helps them increase their survival. But one of the fascinating things to me about bees, so as we know in a honeybee hive, we've got the worker bees that are the ones getting the food and taking care of the queens and all that. You've got your queen, which is there to mate and have babies, right? Lay eggs, all that good stuff. And then you've got these drones. And the drones are the males, and they're purely there for reproduction. So at the end of the season, if they still, so a drone, when it mates with the queen, dies. And so they don't live very long. But if there's a few that didn't mate and are still alive, the worker bees kick them out in the winter and they say, nope, we don't want you here anymore. We don't want to have to take care of you. So they kick them out so that it's only the worker bees and queens or queen that are left in that hive over the winter. That helps them so they don't have as many to take care of over the winter. But then they also they'll congregate and they kind of like they're going to vibrate their flight muscles to maintain that heat. And they can keep it to about 42 to 53 degrees most of the time at the outer edges. In extreme cold winters, that's where you'll see beehive death. A lot of death in the bees and things like that. So when the year when it was negative 29 in February of 2021, a lot of people I talked to, had a lot of bee loss that year. And it was because it was just so cold for multiple days. It was too hard for them to keep them alive, even with their methods of controlling the temperature in there and reducing that hive size. So, it's not always 100%. And that's why sometimes we lose them. In that same winter, bagworms populations plummeted because they weren't able to survive because it's just eggs in that bag, and that bag's not that warm. So if they're not able to survive that, then they're not going to. All right, questions yet? Let me see. Okay. All right. So then the other form of insects overwintering, and that would be to join us in our houses. The household invaders are obviously a common problem. So when we look at those, hold on, I did it again. There we go. So a lot of our insects are going to avoid winter conditions by just saying, you know what, I'm going to stay in this lovely hostel right here, which is our homes. It's not a hotel for them, but they think it is. So they will aggregate in large numbers inside of our homes. And typically they're going to kind of gather on that south and west sides and of the exterior walls and find a way in. And so one of the ways you can work with them is to find the holes. However, they're very tiny, so they get in a very tiny hole. But then they're going to spend the winter in our house in an adult stage of development. They don't really do much in your house. They're not feeding, they're not reproducing. They're just a nuisance because every once in a while they're wandering about. Um, and then on warm sunny days, they're going to move around trying to find a way back outside. Um, but they can stain surfaces, they can release unpleasant odors, they can leave fecal spots around. They're just really not fun to have. So here's some of my favorite ones of them. These ones are box elder bugs. And when I was a kid, my grandma's house in her basement always had box elder bugs. So I that's how I always relate back to box elder bugs, but they are attracted to box elder trees, which we don't have a lot of anymore. That is their favorite food, but you can find box elder bugs. They also like maples, which are a really close relative to a box elder. Um, so so we see them because of that, because a lot of people have maples in their yard, and that's going to attract them to your house. But they're attracted from other trees as well, not just maples. But they are common, very common indoors. And they're going to overwinter as adults again. Um, And then, if we don't have those female box elder tree, then your populations aren't very big. But like I said, they've moved on to other different kinds of trees. So they don't bite us. So that's a good thing. They don't spread disease. They just kind of wander about your house. And some people are really not a fan of bugs wandering around their house. They don't bother me too much, but when I see them, I toss them outside. But you can vacuum them, you can smash them. They're not going to hurt anything. They don't produce a stink or anything like that. I don't think they even would stain anything if you smashed them like on a white curtain or something. These ones are literally just wandering around. But the problem with some of these is that we think that you find a whole bunch in like a wall void, and then you think, oh, I'll spray that. But then what you have is a whole bunch of dead insects in a wall void, which leads to more insects because insects feed on dead insects. So it's kind of this circle thing, right? So you gotta be careful with how you manage them. So then we have this one, the brown marmorated stink bug. These do stink, as their name implies. This one that I'm showing you is the brown marmorated. There's a lot of different stink bugs that get into our homes and cause and just are have a stinky smell when they're smashed. They can, get in like these are the ones that are often found in those wall voids. They don't really bite us or anything. Again, they're just flying around. But this one in particular is an invasive insect, not from here. So the other stink bugs, some of our stink bugs are actually good predators. Some of them are just native, pests or whatever. But this one, because it's not from here, it's more of a problem because it's moving or it's building population without anything to keep it in check. And so you can notice them by these white bands on the antennae and on the legs. And then this right here, development along the side is pretty, that's uniform to the brown marmorated stink bug. And then they're also going to have rounded shoulders right here. So a lot of our stink bugs have kind of spines at their shoulders right there. And this one's one of the rounded ones. This one I've been seeing flying around. They're attracted to the lights by my back deck, and they come in and then I try to pick it up and throw it outside or something, and then my hand smells, and it's like I don't like that. But so this one is one of the ones we don't want because it's not very good to have around because it's stinky. Whoop. Okay. This one, I would say, is my least favorite of all household invaders, the Asian multicolored lady beetle. And that is because I have dealt with this one far too many times. So these are a ladybug, but they're Asian lady beetles. So they're another invasive insect. This one was actually brought here, I think, for scale management in the like 1970s, I think was what it was. Cottony cushion scale or something like that. Anywho, so they were intentionally brought here. And then they got here and they said, and the ladybugs, they said, you know what, this is a lovely place to live. And they have just expanded, like blown up, tons of them. And so um, in those acreage areas, they're really common. So, and think about it, a lot of our acreage homes are maybe a little older and have the, cracks and crevices where they can get in. And they can fly in when you open the door. So the reason this one is like my arch nemesis of household invaders, so I'm a hunter and I hunt down in Northwest Missouri a lot. And there is a ton of these. And this is one of those old acreage houses where I stay. And they get in and they fly around. And even when I'm trying to go to bed, they're flying around my head. And last year we went down there and there were literally swarming outside of the house. There were so many of these. And I've gone down there before where it's been a nice day and they're in my blind when I'm trying to hunt. And that's not very good because, when you're swatting at them because they're in your face, that doesn't really that kind of prevents deer movement, right? You're not supposed to move. They're not supposed to see you. And so they are really problematic. And they just fly on your face, and then they like get stuck to you. They'll stick to your hair. They stick to your clothes. They are terrible. And um, they are like when we went down last year, it was because it was a warm day in November. So it had been cold and then it warmed back up for a day or two and then it was cold again. And so those days when it warms back up, they're like wandering around like, cool, it's spring. Let's move around. And so they can bite. It's not terribly painful, but it's not the most comfortable thing either. And then they do have a little chemical. So like a lot of times when I'll grab them to get rid of them, then there's like a little orange spot on my hand. Or if you smash them on curtains or something like that, you'll get that as well. So vacuuming can work, but you may want to put a little bit of hosiery or nylon stocking over the end of the wand to capture the insects prior so that you don't leave them in your vacuum cleaner where they get stuck in there and smell. So my grandma called me just the other day and asked me, what do I do about these? And I'm like, ugh, they are tough because there's not a lot you can do for them. You know, even because they fly in, a barrier spray isn't going to work very well. So it's really just vacuuming them up as you see them. Um, this one's terrible. So let me know if you guys are seeing this one just as terribly. I do not enjoy this one. And then there's the cluster flies. And actually, when we were down there at the hunting location just last weekend, and I saw a bunch of flies on the window, and I think they might have been. I didn't go up and look that close, but um, these are another introduced from Europe, so they're another invasive, and they're going to overwinter in protected places as adults. So typically, that's like in tree holes, in cavities in trees, but it could be inside buildings. And this is yeesh. That's a mass of them. So when you look at them, if you want to get that close and look at them, but they would have these yellow hairs on their thorax. And if you crush them, they smell like buckwheat honey. So um, if you're seeing them, you can tell if they're them by smashing them and see what they smell like. The fun parts of entomology. So they don't reproduce inside, so that's good because you know the immature form of a fly is a maggot, and nobody wants that. But they're just tons of flies then in your house or whatever, and they're just flying around, and then they tend to kind of what's the word? They just kind of congregate around that window. And I don't know if it was a cluster fly or not, but it was a really large fly in my office window the other day, and it just kept buzzing, and you can hear it like on the window, and that's no fun. So if you've got a lot of these, they're going to make that noise and just aggravate you. So none of these are harmful to us. They're just irritating. And then, of course, these aren't insects, but the spiders, they come inside. Brown recluse spiders are inside all the time. Wolf spiders can kind of be inside and outside. So these are the two that are probably the most feared. Wolf spiders, because they're giant. Some of them are very large, and they're fuzzy, and they just look mean and terrifying, but they're not a real bad spider. The brown recluse spider, on the other hand, some people are very sensitive to the bite from a brown recluse spider. Not everyone gets the really bad reaction. And most people don't get that. Like, don't Google it. Just don't do it. There's the pictures are just terrible. But most people, it's maybe a pretty bad reaction or even just a regular spider bite to some people, but some people do get other health issues from it. So I would tell you to be cautious because brown recluse spiders produce a necrotoxin, so it's a toxin that kills, so it just kills the cells as it moves. um, so it can do some damage to some people, but again, not everybody is as sensitive. But what you're looking for is right here on the back. Do you see that fiddle shape? So if it has that fiddle shape, it's a brown recluse spider. If it does not have that, it is not a brown recluse spider. The thing that people are confusing is this guy, the wolf spider, they're much bigger. And everybody thinks, well, the big, scary looking one must be the very dangerous one. But it's actually not that scary looking. Legs and all are about the size of a quarter, as you can see here in this picture. So it's not, it doesn't look terrifying. They are reclusive. So by nature, they want to stay hidden. They want to be where you're not around them. So, um, and in my office, we have a smidgen of a problem with brown recluse spiders. Okay, a bigger than a smidgen, but we do have some that wander through. And one day I was on a phone call and one came out and I tried to hit it with a fly swatter and I missed and it ran away. So they want to be reclusive, but they are going to bite you if they feel that you're threatening them. So the biggest thing with brown recluse spiders is to make sure that where you put your hands when you're taking a box out of storage, that you look first if you have a problem, especially if you have a problem with brown recluse spiders. But just look where you're putting your hands so you're not smashing it on there. When you get out your sweaters or your boots for the first time this fall, this winter, shake them out good, maybe wash your sweaters again so that because they're hiding in those spots that are like nice and tight and cozy. They don't want to be just wandering around like a wolf spider. So that's the biggest thing is just to watch where you're putting where when you're getting stuff out of storage, where you're touching things. And then we've got a few other spiders. This here is the cellar spider. I put him on. They're hard to see. They're like that flimsy little spider that you'll see like in the corner in your basement. That's your cellar spider. There is a yellow sack spider. It's got a yellow butt, basically. And then the woodlouse hunter. They're kind of creepy looking, but they're not that bad either. And then, of course, I threw in the daddy longlegs, which is not actually a spider. It's a close relative, but not a true spider. And no, they don't have the most poisonous bite, but big enough, but the mouth is not big. That's not true. That what they said in Honey, I Shrunk the Kids, I think it was. But their mouth, or they do not have a poisonous bite. But what we have to remember with all of these guys, all of our spiders, is that they're feeding on insects in our house. So they're a good guy. Um, I'm that weirdo that when I see a spider in my house, I take it outside if I can, or I just let it go if it's not a big scary one, right? Because they're good. They're eating insects, and I don't like the insects in my house. So, yes, I am that weirdo. All right. So for reducing household invaders, thinking about prevention is going to be your best thing. Prevention and exclusion. So reduce those favorable habitats from around your foundation. If you have a lot of like grass, tall plant material right around your door of your house, you're just that's a great habitat for a lot of these insects to come in because they're right there by your door. Then you open your door, then they fly in, and there you go. So making sure that your vegetation is cleaned up, cut well, things like that. Or if you can, kind of pull it back a little bit so it's not so close to the door. Um, if you're bringing in any sort of plant material, hopefully you already did that because I think it's probably dead if you didn't. But inspect those plants before you bring them inside. Maybe give them a spray of 7 a couple days before you bring them inside. I would give it a couple days before. Um, And then exclusion. So keeping the doors closed when not in use. Make sure that you've got nice tight fitting screens with no rips or tears. So if you have a schnauzer, you might have a problem with rips and tears in your screens. I do. Uh, so any kind of rip or tear is a place where they can get in. Checking and repairing those defects in any fascia or soffits, going through with caulk sealants and those meshes and door sweeps and things like that to really eliminate those cracks and holes leading into those building voids. So my doors don't line up very well and there's a crack. And so I put some of that, the door sweep kind of things in there. So weather stripping where you can, those kinds of things. Just ways to exclude them from coming in the first place. Let's see, I have a couple of questions, I think. Rita catches and releases spiders. Very nice. See, they're good. Spiders are great. I don't like them like crawling on me. I'm not that big of a fan of spiders, but they are really good to have around. They're a good predator. All right. Thanks for sharing that. And then there are home barrier sprays you can use around the outside of your house. Um, if you use it inside, then you can have dead insects. And that's what I was saying with the wall void. So that can attract those carpet beetles and other insects that feed on the dead insects. So you can use those barrier sprays inside and outside, but if it's not a huge problem, I'd stick with just the outside of your house. And when I'm talking those home barrier sprays, that's like your home defense or tempo is one that you can use there too. So, but one of the biggest things that works really well for household invaders is a sticky trap. People want this, that, and the other to kill them. They're going to get stuck on a sticky trap and they're going to die. And sticky traps are easy. Just make sure you put them where cats, dogs, and other pets and children can't get stuck to them. They do stick very well to like your shoe. I've seen that happen. So make sure they're in a location that's not easily accessed by people or pets. But otherwise, sticky traps are fantastic. They're going to help. If you're one that doesn't want the spiders, you're never going to completely eliminate them. But sticky traps work really well for spiders. The other good thing with using a sticky trap is that if you're like, well, I've got some spiders, I'm not sure what kind they are. I want to make sure they're not brown recluse. If you have a sticky trap out, they'll wander onto it eventually, and then you can see what species you have of these things. So it's kind of nice to know what you're dealing with in your house. And then of course, a vacuum is just as easy as anything, right? Vacuum them up where you see them. Even if they're still alive, you can vacuum them up or take a tissue, grab them, throw them in, toilet or the trash or whatever. Some people don't want to touch them even that close, and I get that. Insect fear is a thing. I get that. But so, just wanted to show you. So, homeowners are very annoyed in the spring and the fall. So these are the times. So insects come in the spring. These house or fall, sorry. These household invaders are going to congregate in on the south and west side of our walls and move indoors in the fall, and then they just kind of overwinter in those warmer locations over the winter, and then in the spring they're like, "Ooh, it's spring. It's warmer, and I'm going to go back out." And so then they come back out again. So the same insects that came in the fall, if you didn't kill them, are going back out in the spring. And so that's when we get annoyed. So we've got to make sure we're dealing with our pests at the right time. So that early fall time frame is when you want to do something. That's when you want to use your barrier sprays around the outside of your house, get those sticky traps out, make sure that all your screens, your doors, all of the holes are filled in and everything like that. You want to make sure it's done by fall because that's when they're going to move in. Okay. So before we move on to this, I do have another question here. The Zevo flying insect trap. Okay, thank you for bringing that up. I haven't used that one. I don't know how well it works. It's kind of like a indoor, what are those zap traps that you put outside that they fly into and zaps them? It's kind of like that, isn't it? It just attracts them. Okay, that's what I thought. I'd they probably would work for some of the flying insects. Does it work for like the ladybugs or anything like that, or what are you seeing killing being killed by those? Because I've not used them. Moths and gnats. Oh, okay, it would work for moths even. That's cool. Yeah. So I mean, if it works, what it's doing is it's putting that light out to attract them to it and then killing them. So yeah, I know that there's some like things that you plug in that's like supposed to be a sound or a vibration or something. I don't think those work very well, but yeah, you haven't had the ladybugs. Oh, lucky you. So yeah, I mean, if it works, great. That'd be a good way to take care of some of those as well. And it captures them when it kills them then, so that they're not, you don't have like dead bugs laying nearby or anything. So I've never used them. Okay, cool. Well, yeah, there you go. Another way to take care of them. Very good. Thanks for sharing. Okay. So then, some of the ways we can help our pollinators and our beneficials through the winter, obviously, avoid using pesticides in their areas where you're finding them. The raking and removing leaves. Okay, so yes, we don't want to leave a lot of leaves on the lawn over the winter, but you can kind of rake them up and pile them around trees and around your landscape plants, because a lot of your insects are overwintering in and amongst those leaves. And so if you pile them in those areas, where you want them to be, like in your landscape beds or underneath your trees, then they're going to overwinter there. So that's a really good way to deal with that. Rather than, I've seen the um, gifts or whatever on Facebook where it's like you have all these bags of that garden waste, and you're also throwing away the insects that were in there too. So um, and then, of course, avoid cleaning up your landscape gardens in the fall. Now, I'm not saying to not do that in the vegetable garden, because we want to clean up our vegetable garden in the fall because of the bad insects and the disease that would overwinter there. But a flower bed, your regular flower gardens, if we can leave those till spring, you're going to be a lot better off, because as I showed you, like the leafcutter bee and some of those bees are going to nest in those um, cylinders, and one of the ways that they'll lay those eggs is actually down the stems of, like coneflowers and stuff like that have a hollow stem, and so they'll lay their eggs in there. So if you remove that, then you're removing those eggs. So if you leave it there, it's good for them. The key with this is to fight the urge to clean it up in March when it warms up, or like last year, I think we had a 70-degree day in February. So it's really hard when we get those early spring days when it's warm and you want to do something. And so you're like, well, I'll go clean up my flower beds. If you clean those up in March, those insects haven't come out yet. They haven't emerged yet. So it's really hard, but you got to fight that urge and avoid cleaning those gardens up until, I like to go with late April. I know. I'm sure that you're all gasping. But but you've got to wait longer so that those guys can come out at least mid-April. And that is the hardest part, because it warms up and you're like, all right, I want to do something outside. So I always say, instead, take your book out and read your book out on the deck or something along those lines, right? Get your seed catalogs out and read those when you're outside instead. So yeah, leaving that there is going to help. And then leaving that bare soil for ground nesting bees and other ground nesting insects or overwintering insects is really good. So this one I found, I don't remember where I found this picture, but this is a ground nesting bee habitat. And so they've got these little rocks, so, it looks nice, but it's just bare soil. So the bees and other things can nest in and amongst the rocks here. So that's the other hard thing, as a horticulturist, we're always like, oh, put mulch around your garden to help with weeds and to help increase the, soil or moisture holding capacity and to improve the soil. But if you leave a little bare soil, it's actually good for some of our pollinators, like bumblebees. Like I said, they're a ground nester, and so they like that bare soil where they can make their nest. So it's hard, but you should do some of that too. And then you can provide a bee hotel. Um, if you've got one, that's great. Make sure you clean them out after everything's emerged each year. Okay. And then, of course, have those early spring blooming plants available. So I was looking through a guide from, and this is a short list, very short list. There's a lot more than this. This was from the Xerces Society, on different plants. And I was looking, okay, which ones are the earliest blooming? And so, like prairie phlox, prairie willow start in March. Red columbine, spotted geranium, Virginia iris, American plum, and fragrant sumac are all going to start blooming in April. And then don't forget the dandelions. I know, we hate dandelions in our lawns, but they are a very good early season pollinator plant for things like honeybees and stuff. Um, so having that early spring blooming plant is going to help those insects as they first start coming out of their winter period, winter dormancy, especially for bees, because like I said, honeybees are not dormant or anything during the winter. They're still moving about. And so, it gets to be March and they're running out of food reserves. So they're kind of wandering around on those warm days looking for something to get through till things start pollinate or flowering more. So look for some of those real early spring blooming plants. And don't forget, when you are helping your pollinators, to have a whole season of flowers for good pollinator plants. So you're looking early spring, mid spring, late spring, summer, and then early fall, mid fall, and late fall. And that late fall is hard too. We don't have a lot of things in that level either. So and then here's just a few of the ways that they'll overwinter. You got your little bee hotel here with some snow on it. They could be in and around these plants, so that's why we leave our plants standing over the winter. They could be underneath under the ground. So snow is an insulator. It does insulate actually. So they're under the soil and under the snow. Some of them are just in the mulch under the snow, but they've got a lot of places that they can overwinter. And then, does a cold winter mean less bugs or reduced beneficials? And not usually. The ones that are here are adapted to our fairly normal climate. Um, the steady temperatures and the snow cover will help them a little bit more. But we do have a lot of winters where we don't have a lot of snow cover. And like I said, that is an insulator, but they'll survive without it in most years. Like I said, that extreme cold that we had in February of 2021 was very unusual for here, for everywhere. That was that polar vortex, I think. And it's very unusual, and it is more difficult for those insects to withstand. That year, the benefit of that was that we did have such a drop in bagworm population. But as we know, with all of our insects, they will rebound, and they are starting to rebound. But most of the time under our normal winter conditions, they're going to be just fine. Even a cold, a relatively extreme cold winter, they're going to be fine. It's those really outlandish type stuff that may cause problems. Because we don't see -29 for 3 days very often in Nebraska. All right, so there is one bug, we'll call it a bug, that is you can find them in the snow. And this is a springtail. And so they are a cool temperature loving arthropod. And so they're not a true insect, they're a collembola, so it's a little bit different. The reason they do have the 6 legs, but their mouths retract back into their head, so they're not considered like a true insect. Um, but they'll call them snow fleas because they're in the snow. I always call them springtails. What they have, they jump like a flea, but they actually, so fleas are kind of jumping up, straight up. Can you see my hand here, David? So they're jumping straight up, but your springtails kind of fling themselves. So they have this forked appendage, which is like a furcula, and it like flings them. So it's kind of like doing a backflip, sort of. Um, and that's how they jump. So that appendage is like folded up under them most of the time, but then when they want to jump, they spring it out. And so that's why it's kind of like weird jumping, but that's what they do. And so they bounce around. They feed on decaying organic matter and microscopic fungi and algae. They're often encountered on top of snow or on sidewalks around homes where winter snow starts to melt. I have had questions on this one when they've gotten inside. So usually it's in a basement. They get in through like a window well in the basement and are found downstairs. And the reason of that is because it's very moist in a basement, right? Unless we use a dehumidifier, it gets very humid in our basements, especially, wrong times of the year. But and so that's where most of the questions I've had about the snow fleas or the springtails are just any time of year, but they're in the basement because they get in through that window well. So they are harmless, even in the house. They're harmless. They don't bite. They don't do anything like that. They're kind of fun because they're weird. They're just a very weird thing, but they have a special protein in their body that works like antifreeze and lets them stay active despite weather. despite the cold weather. So they're kind of a fun one. Just wanted to show you that there are bugs that just love the snow. I think I might be the snow flea of the humans because I like snow too. All right. So, do I have questions? I'll stop sharing so I can read the questions or see questions.
We're asking, where do the snow fleas come from or where do they originate?
I think they're naturally found in Nebraska. I don't think it's like a an invader from like a invasive or anything like that.
Is there a certain habitat that they're attracted to?
Yeah, they like those really moist areas. So high moisture areas with lots of decaying matter. So really underneath mulch could be a spot where you could find them.
Rotted wood piles, maybe?
Hmm. Yep. Yep. Yeah, I know. I remember at least one that they came into their basement and I said, well, you got too much humidity down there. Use a dehumidifier. Just kind of vacuum them up where you see them. I mean, they're not harming anything inside, but I think they also might have had like some rotting wood on that window well or whatever that would cause that. All right, we got a question here. Is it an insect that causes a gall in dahlias? What gall does dahlias get? Is it a flower gall?
It's a flower gall. There's crown gall, and then there's a
Oh,
under there, and that's a bacterium actually. It's,
okay.
it's
Is the
not like
flower one a bacterium too, or is that an aerified mite?
some of those are mites, but this one I actually
That one.
had the other day. So
Okay.
it's actually bacterium in the soil that causes that that growth. Actually, I have that resource and I found it at Oregon State Extension. I found it for another lady in town. They asked for the same thing.
Yeah, so a lot of our galls are from like insects or closely related creatures, but like the mites, but some of them do come from like fungi and bacteria with our galls. But yeah, a lot more of them are probably either the mites or like parasitic wasps usually. That's where your bullet gall from on oaks is a wasp. The flower gall on ashes, that's an aerified mite. And don't ask me to spell it. I'm not even sure I'm pronouncing it quite right. But that's a hard word. um, David, she's asking, is there a way to treat that bacteria? If it's in the soil, probably not.
It's in the soil and it's not. So what you end up doing is you remove the plants. So it's basically it's there. It's not going to cure itself in the case. So then you have to uh, remove the dahlias and raise something different. There's actually an approved list of species that you can plant back in. And so, Anne, I will actually send that to you on text if you like. Or if anyone else is interested in it, I can look it up and I can put it in the chat.
Thanks. What other questions do you guys have? Did I cover all the fun stuff you were looking for tonight, David?
Yes, and we're talking about swallowtails because dill is a food plant for the swallowtail species.
Yes.
Mhm.
Dill
That's
and parsley, right?
mhm.
Yeah.
So they love chewing on those
Mhm.
because that will help them feed and then they will go build pupate.
I think one of my master gardeners was she planted extra parsley for them and they still ate all of it.
Mhm. But that's okay. That's
That's all
okay.
right.
Mind those guys eating us.
Yeah. Yeah. They're pretty very pretty caterpillar too. I like swallowtails. They're one of my favorite butterflies. Any other questions? David, you're muted if somebody was asking something.
Yeah, I am. I'm looking for Anne's article here. And just a moment, let me dig this up and put it in the chat.
Mhm. Everybody have their Halloween costumes picked out for tomorrow? As you can tell from my background, I'm a big fan. But I
I'm
don't
just
dress up.
myself and I scare people away.
No.
Article from Oregon State Extension. It's actually a Pacific Northwest handbook. So Pacific Northwest is University of Idaho, Washington State, and Oregon State Extension systems. So very good resource, and they'll have. And yes, the handout will be emailed out. I will explain. My computer went through the migration, so I have to get everyone's emails, and I will send that out.
David, if you haven't sent it out yet, I'll send you an updated version. After I sent it, I was playing around in there and I found a couple typos, so I'll I'll send out the new version to you so that you can send that correct one.
I'm hoping my email lists were not eaten up in the migration.
Ooh, let me know how that worked out. Yeah. Are you trying to talk to us, David? You're muted.
That is a scary migration. And so I don't want to lose stuff. This is your evaluation link for all of you online. So if you would kindly click on that link, the paper copy is out here in our group here in person. Please fill those evaluations out, please. That would be great. So we are talking about the importance of evaluation to show our impact, and Nicole is a gracious collaborator on this. So I really appreciate her presenting tonight.
Yeah. Always enjoy working with you, David.
We have a lot of fun. I did a radio program the other few weeks ago.
Yeah. Yeah, if you guys if you need the link to it, David and I just chatted about all kinds of fall stuff.
Mhm. We did. We had a lot of fun.
Here, I can put the link in the chat. Let me find it here. I'll just give you the link for the whole thing. Copy. There you go. That's to just all of my podcasts. David was on with me. Was yours October 3rd? Was that you?
I believe
Yeah,
so.
October 3rd. So if you're wanting to listen to that one, so you can go through that link or you can find it on like I think it's on Spotify, Apple, and maybe Google podcasts. So you can just look up Yard and Garden with Nicole.
We have lots of fun. We're trying a lot of different ways to teach,
Yeah.
and listen to the podcast. That counts for education hours too.
And I think, David, I just looked at it and it was 47 minutes. So that's almost an hour.
Yes, yeah, yeah.
Talked about all kinds of fall prep stuff.
Yeah.
So
So anything else tonight, you guys? If
any
not,
other questions?
any more questions? If not, I will stop the recording.